And welcome to another episode of what used to be called The Open Door, is now called Illuminati, with your host, L. Tonight I thought I would read from a book called Scarlet and the Beast. This is volume 2, and the subtitle is English Freemasonry, Mother of Modern Cults versus Mystery Babylon, Mother of Harlots. So let us begin. Written by a person by the name of John Daniel, which I'm assuming is a pseudonym, not his real name, for I guess his own protection. And I'll be reading from the chapter 2 called The Hermaphrodite God. Once again, I'll be reading from Scarlet and the Beast, Volume 2, written by a John Daniel. Chapter 2, The Hermaphrodite God. This is more evidence of what I was speaking about on the previous show. Now, as I did last time, I'm going to reiterate. I don't necessarily disagree. Matter of fact, I don't disagree at all. My only problem is that it's kept hidden from the rest of us. That's my only problem. I have no problem whatsoever with these beliefs because I kind of share them myself. So, let us begin. Chapter 2, The Hermaphrodite God. The word legend is today in better standing than it was a short time ago. Legendary has often been a word of ill repute, for it has meant mythical to most people. The word tradition stands far higher in the estimation of historians. Scholars today, thanks to literary criticism, historical research, and archaeological observations, have more confidence in the existence of a residue of fact amongst the legends and traditions about well-known historical or biblical figures. Blown up and fanciful they may be, but legends and traditions are often the enlargements of reality, and traditions may not be exaggerations at all, but actual fact. Dr. William Stewart McBurney, 1973. That's who I'm quoting. I continue. Genesis 11 reports that following the flood, Noah's 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, settled to the east in the land of Shinar, Babylonia. We will trace the lineage of Ham, for it was through his family that Babylon was built, and the Babylonian mystery religion, which worships 2 equal gods of opposite sex, developed. When Ham is mentioned in Genesis 9, he is always identified as Ham, the father of Canaan. Rabbinical tradition, as recorded in the 12th century, Zohar explains, Ham represents the refuse and dross of the gold, the stirring and rousing of the unclean spirit of the ancient serpent. It is for that reason that he is designated the father of Canaan, namely of Canaan, who brought curses on the world, of Canaan, who was cursed, of Canaan, who darkened the faces of mankind. Canaan inherited the unclean spirit of his father, the spirit of defiance and homosexuality. The first spirit, that of defiance, is suggested by the name Ham. Ham comes from a Hebrew primitive root word which means to inflame self as in anger. The name Ham also means hot, as from a tropical habitat. It also denotes sunburnt or dark-skinned. Ham's progeny are the black races. Let me repeat that again. Ham's progeny are the black races. The Bible tells us that when the nations were scattered abroad, Egypt was settled by Hamites, for Egypt was known as the land of Ham. The Egyptians engaged in ancestor worship, which was, and still is, the standard practice of mystery religions, believing the lie of the serpent that man can become as gods. Egyptians made gods of their forefathers. In the Egyptian pantheon, Ham was identified with the sun and worshipped as the sun god. Homosexuality, a rite in mystery religions. The second unclean spirit of Ham, transferred to his progeny, was the spirit of homosexuality. Ham was bisexual, performing his first homosexual act on his father Noah, while Noah was drunk. The English translation of Genesis 9:20 through 22 and 24 through 25 does not reveal this, but the Hebrew text does. And Noah began to be an husbandman, and planted a vineyard. And he drank of the wine, and was drunken, and he was uncovered within his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father, and told his two brethren without. And Noah awoke from his wine, and knew what his younger son had done unto him. And he said, Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be unto his brethren. The Hebrew word for uncovered and the phrase saw the nakedness describe Ham's homosexual act. Uncovered means to denude in a disgraceful sense. Saw figuratively means to approve of or to enjoy. Nakedness literally means the nudity of the male sex organ. Paraphrasing this scripture, we discover Ham's homosexual act. Ham disgracefully denuded his father, approved of and enjoyed his sex organ. But what are we to make of Noah's cursing his grandson, Canaan, rather than Ham, the perpetrator of this deviant act, unless Canaan, too, participated in the act? This is highly probable, since rabbinical tradition holds that Canaan was present in the tent when his father Ham sodomized Noah. In that volume of the Jewish Kabbalah, called the Zohar, the rabbis say that Canaan seized the opportunity to work his own will by removing from that righteous man, Noah, the mystical symbol. The mystical symbol, as we have already seen, signifies the male sex organ. The rabbis suspect Canaan of being involved in the act of sodomizing Noah. Indeed, we find that Genesis 10:19 documents the founding of the homosexual societies at Sodom and Gomorrah by Canaan's descendants. Archaeologist Merrill Unger writes that these two cities were enslaved by one of the most terrible and degrading forms of idolatry, which abetted rather than restrained their immorality. The uncertain spirit of defiance and homosexuality go hand in hand. As we have seen, Scripture records that after Ham sodomized his father, he told his two brethren without. Told can be translated to announce boldly. Clearly, Ham defiantly bragged about or flaunted his homosexual act. Homosexual gods and societies. As Canaan's bisexual father was deified, those ancestral gods of Babylon, depicting Ham, were carried into all nations and portrayed as bisexual. In fact, homosexuality in the ancient world was accepted and tolerated, even honored and incorporated into religion. Rhea Tannehill, in Sex in History 1980, informs us that the practice of homosexuality in all Eastern mystery religions was to make one like the gods. Vern L. Bullough, in Homosexuality, a History, notes that Greek mythology is full of stories of love between gods of the same sex, such as Zeus and Ganymede, Heracles and Iolus or Hylas, and Apollo and Hastings. I'm going to have trouble saying this word. I'm assuming that the H is silent. Jacinth. Pagans around the world have believed that the homosexual tendency of their gods were the result of their having once been hermaphrodites. For example, the Greek god Hermaphroditos was believed equipped with the physical characteristics of both sexes. Likewise, the Balinese placed a high value on their hermaphrodite god, Sing Hang Tonigel. I don't know if I'm saying it right. Also known as the solitary or Tijanitja. Tijanitja, according to Balinese cosmology, represented the time before the gods, before the separation of male or from female. Now, let me read that part again. That's very important. Tijanitja, according to Balinese cosmology, represented the time before the gods, before the separation of male from female. Let me repeat that part again. Before the separation of male from female. Thus, Tijanitja is thought of as both husband and wife, male and female. The yin yang, on the next page, represents the homosexual gods of the Orient. In Hinduism, Brahma, the counterfeit Lord Creator of the universe, and I'm reading what the author states. Okay, so that's not me. That's the author of the book, Scarlet and the Beast. So we can see where his angle is coming from. As I stated, hopefully in the last episode, just because a person talks truth doesn't mean that they don't have an agenda. Okay? So I'm assuming that he's going to continue denouncing and belittling other religions. In Hinduism, Brahma, the counterfeit Lord Creator of the universe, was in his origins a hermaphrodite. After separating himself into two gods of opposite sex, he became Vak and Vajra. The sexual union of Vak and Vajra completed creation. Hindus believe that creation evolved through successive acts of intercourse. As a result of this doctrine, the Hindu religion is permeated by a most disgusting and humanly degrading devotion toward all forms of sex. For example, the erotic carvings in the temple reliefs below are found on the walls of a 16th century Srinagar Hindu temple in Trichinopoly, India. Homosexuality has flourished in many pagan societies around the globe. Among the native Indian tribes in the Americas, for instance, this same religious debauchery was an institutionalized practice for centuries. Primarily among males, the Mayan Indians in Central America and Mexico, during the days of the Spanish conquistadors, were found to be great sodomites, Tannehill confirms. They recognized... let me just stop here once again. So, again, the author of this book, Scarlet and the Beast, is again insulting the religions of the ancient societies, which Christianity basically came and destroyed. So I'm assuming now, I'm gonna take the assumption that the author of this book is some form of a Christian, probably fundamentalist, maybe Catholic, could be Protestant, I'm not sure. but he seems to be one of these fundamentalist Christian persons, which doesn't help the situation, because those who practice the mystery religion will use this sort of this sort of type of talk to to go after Christians. And make no mistake, that is in the not too distant future. The rumblings of it are happening right now. I will continue. I will now quote the author of the other book, Tannehill. Tannehill confirms they recognized adolescent homosexuality and indeed favored it over heterosexuality. Until a boy was old enough to marry, it was usual for his parents to provide him with a male companion, a slave boy, to meet his needs. And he was discouraged from meeting them in any other way. The Maya also recognized and tolerated the type of adult homosexuality that is permanent and genetic. I'm gonna stop right here, and I'm stopping a lot because I am noticing a lot of suspicious things from the author of this book. The information is very interesting, but and that paragraph that he quoted from the book by Tannehill, he has sentences which in between them, some of the sentences have ... which usually denotes that he took a sentence, skipped one or two other sentences, and then put in another sentence. And that's very deceptive, because it takes the original quote or information from the other book out of context. So when I see that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say ... so that you know that he took a sentence from one paragraph, combined another sentence with another paragraph. Okay? Either he did it for his book, Scarlet and the Beast, or the book he's reading from did it from some other source. So whenever you see that, when you see ... in between a sentence and a paragraph, that means it isn't the original sentence that comes afterwards. That's how I came to understand it anyway. This civilization mysteriously disappeared. Remember the prophet's warning against homosexuality in Isaiah 3:9. Woe to them, they have brought disaster upon themselves. In China too, we see the homosexual lifestyle not only tolerated but approved. During the Han imperial period, 206 BC through 220 AD, homosexuality between consenting adults was fashionable. For example, male homosexuality, commonly known as Lung Yang, named after a young man by that name, became the favorite of the 4th century BC Han emperors. Many of the emperors were bisexual rather than strictly homosexual. Again, during the time of the Sung emperors, 960 through 1127 AD, both homosexuality and lesbianism was accepted with a shrug. Homosexual priests. In pagan religions, and I'm gonna interrupt right now and say another interesting thing. Not only in pagan religions, but modern religions. Okay, but of course, the author of this book, being whom I think he is, ain't gonna talk about that. In pagan religions, a homosexual was considered to be made in the image of his Hermaphrodite God, having both male and female tendencies. Thus, homosexual rites became common practice within all mystery religions, and it was from homosexuals that pagans selected their priests. For example, in the 10th century AD, Buddhist monks in Japan were homosexual. The relation of the master to a disciple youth was one in which the elder monk acted as a teacher and guardian, and the younger responded with love and devotion. Typically, the relation culminated in pederasty and homosexuality. I'm going to assume, I have stopped reading. I'm going to assume that pederasty is a technical way of saying pedophilia. So, this homosexual paradigm was likewise commonplace with the Greeks 1,500 years earlier, who staunchly had maintained that homosexuality was a branch of higher education. Greek culture venerated homosexuality because her wise men indulged in it. Below, this the other author of the other book, confirms Plato was the lover of Alexis of Dion, and for 3 generations the position as head of the academy he founded passed from lover to beloved. Aristotle was the lover of his pupil Hermias, whom he immortalized in a hymn. Euripides, the playwright, was the lover of the tragic poet Agathon. Phidias, the sculptor, the lover of his pupil Agoracritus of Pharos. The physician Theomedon, the lover of the astronomer Eudoxus of Cnidus. Alexander the Great, and his male lovers. The list could be extended. The Platonic description of male love has been a dominant theme in all defenses of homosexuality. Plato wrote that homosexual as much as heterosexual love was part of nature's plan. Thus, the Greeks permitted and encouraged homosexuality in a young boy's life. In fact, the youth's mentor was an older homophile. When the youth grew to manhood, he likewise was expected to nurture a young boy in the ways of his gods. The Etruscan forerunners of the Romans tolerated homosexuality, including Greek-style pederasty. But following the eviction of the last Etruscan king and the founding of the Roman Republic, the practice was suppressed. In the Code of Justinian, the digest of Roman law, homosexuality was treated as a capital offense. As time passed, however, and Rome became an empire, it lost its civic discipline and moral vigor. In fact, it is said that the Roman Empire fell because homosexuality was widespread among the military from the empire's earliest days. Bullo informs us that prior to the 3rd century AD, Imperial Rome took no legal measures against adult homosexuality, since the army in the main favored Mithraism with strongly homosexual undertones. To legislate against homosexuality would have meant alienated the very men who were responsible for making and breaking emperors. Homosexuality among the Roman military originated during the eastern campaigns of Pompey the Great in the 1st century BC. The soldiers stationed in the east were introduced to the religion of Mithras, the Persian sun god, which was a development of Zoroastrianism. It was said that Mithras was miraculously born of his father, I'm going to try it again to pronunciate this, Ormuzd. Both the father and the son were venerated in homosexual ceremonies. Hence, Mithraism became popular with the Roman soldiers who were away from their women for long periods of time. By the 1st century AD, promiscuity and degradation in Rome had taken root. Every form of immorality competed for attention. Among the pandemic vices of imperial Rome was homosexuality, including pederasty. I'm sorry, I am new to this word. Many among the Roman elite justified pederasty by invoking the Greek philosophy of man-boy sexual education. Roman consuls pursued freeborn Roman boys. The Roman Emperor Nero, the infamous persecutor of the early Christians, was homosexual. In fact, Nero dressed as a bride in a marriage ceremony in which he was wedded to a male lover. Playwrights during the Nero era depicted the Roman elite exhausting themselves in every variety of homosexual indulgence. A few of the surviving Republican critics of Rome's decadence correctly predicted Rome to be in an irreversible decline. Interestingly, I'm going to note that that Rome is considered a republic and they were still doing these acts. I kind of think it's still going on, if you get my drift. Freemasonry promotes homosexuality. As we move closer to modern times, we see that during the Masonic revolutions throughout Europe in the 19th century, laws restraining homosexuality were relaxed. Tannehill informs us that in France, by the 1860s, homosexuality and lesbianism were, if not commonplace, at least tolerated. This was due in part to the efforts of a homosexual organization founded in 1862 called the Urnings or Uranians, named after the Greek god Uranus. In 1893, the Urnings founded their own secret society called the Order of Chaeroneia, with rituals, insignia, and secret codes patterned after Freemasonry. The Chaeroneia Lodge, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that word. It could be Charonia. I'm not sure. Planned to organize all homosexuals into a political force, which they heretofore were unable to do. Germany was their target. They would infiltrate the imperial court for the purpose of cutting the emperor off from his more responsible advisors, thereby influencing German society so they could practice their lifestyle openly and freely. By the turn of the 20th century, militant homosexuals were heavily involved in German politics. Their scheme, however, was exposed by a Berlin publisher. Tannehill tells the story. In 1906, Maximilian Harden, publisher of the Berlin periodical Die Zukunft, or Die Zukunft, decided to open everyone's eyes, including those of the emperor, to the dangers of an Urnings alliance. These people formed a comradeship which is stronger than that of the monastic orders or of Freemasonry, which grips tighter and makes a link across all the walls of creed, state, and class, which unites the most remote, the most foreign, in a fraternal league of offense and defense. Men of this breed are to be found everywhere, at courts, in high positions in armies and navies, in the editorial offices of great newspapers, at tradesmen's and teachers' desks, even on the bench. all rallied together against the common enemy. The common enemy was the German imperial state. Allied with the earnings was the German Communist Party, operating from within the Grand Orient Masonic lodges. Hence, public opinion generated by the lodges favored sexual emancipation. Felix Hale, spokesman for the German Communist Party, summarized the party's opinion on the subject during the first decade of the 20th century. The class-conscious proletariat, uninfluenced by the ideology of the churches, approaches the question of sex life and also the problem of homosexuality with a lack of prejudice afforded by an understanding of the overall social structure. In accordance with the scientific insights of modern times, the proletariat regards these relations as a special form of sexual gratification and demands the same freedom and restrictions for these forms of sex life as for intercourse between the sexes, such as control over one's own body, and finally, respect for the rights of non-involved parties. I will stop here and just make a note of something. This is very interesting that someone in, I guess, some leadership role in a communist party or group is apparently here, if the quote is real, defending homosexuality. So I wonder why a lot of the communist nations today frown upon it and actually punish people who get caught doing homosexual acts. The only thing I can think of is maybe the homosexuality. What he's talking about here is the leaders of communism, the leadership of the communist groups. Maybe what he's trying to say here, that they should be allowed. I don't know, but seems a little contradictory. So either the information we get today about how communist groups work and how they and what they do to their population, and either they're telling the truth or they're lying, or there seems to be variety in the very different communist groups as far as certain topics are concerned. I will continue. The worship of the phallus and Freemasonry. As homosexuality was practiced in mystery religions, the worship of the phallus became a ceremonial rite. As Augustine confirms that the penis was worshipped in Rome during his day, as a young man he took pleasure in the shameful games which were celebrated in honor of the gods and goddesses, including Cybele. Effeminate men were consecrated to the Great Mother in the rites of Liber, the god of the seed of fruits and animals. The devotees worshipped the private parts of man. The most vivid legend of phallus worship is found in the myth of the Egyptian god and goddess Osiris and Isis. Following is a summary of that legend. Typhon, the Egyptian god of evil, usurped the throne of Osiris while Osiris was on a journey. Upon his return, Osiris was killed by Typhon, who then severed his body into 14 pieces, sending one piece to each of the 14 regions ruled by Osiris. Isis went in search of her husband's body parts and found only 13, which became the sacred number in Egyptian mythology. And that probably is, I'm going to stop right here, that probably is also the origin of 13 and being an unlucky number, you know. The one part she could not find was his penis. Upon returning to Egypt, she molded a symbol of his penis and set it up in her temple as an object of worship. This phallic symbol, known as the Ankh, is in the form of a cross topped with an egg-shaped circle. The cross represents the penis, while the circle represents the vagina. So, I ask you, if you, and this is me talking now, if you remove the circle, the egg-shaped circle which represents the vagina, what do you have? You see what I'm trying to say? First it was worshipped, both the male and the female were being worshipped. The private parts. At some point, and there's a reason why the vagina is above the cross, denoting the power, denoting Sybil, the great mother, Isis. At some point, the mystery religion, it is me talking now, they removed the symbol of the vagina, which represented the goddess, and now all we have is the penis. Take that as you will. So my point, before I continue, my point is that aspect of the worship of the feminine is gone. All we're worshiping now are, well, I'm not, but the majority of people out here in the world, whether they know it or not, they're worshiping the male penis. They're not worshiping sex in general anymore. They're worshiping just the penis. The male, the power, the machoism, which, as long as it had the vagina on top, was kept in check. There was a balance, as they say in Star Wars. It's interesting that in those films, those Star Wars films, they always talk about balance. So the so-called good side understands that the bad side is necessary. The bad side also understands that the so-called good side is necessary. You see? The Jedis always talk about a balance to the Force. You see? But they have mutual respect for each other because they know that both their philosophies come from the same source. The male-female, the yin and the yang. Another question I have. Notice how the male-dominated society insinuates through those Star Wars films that the feminine is the dark side. You see what I'm saying? The Jedis follow the good side, right? What they call the light side of the Force, I guess. Light is yang, darkness is yin, if I'm correct. Let me just make sure. Yeah. Yin is the negative, and yang is the positive. So you see, this is really all about male domination. That's really what it's all about. It's the hidden reality. They want you to, they try to change it up and make it sound like it's good versus evil. Okay? It's not. It's the negative versus the positive. But all of this comes from the worship of the female and the male, the Hermaphrodite God. I will continue. Freemasonry commemorates the legend of Isis and Osiris in the initiation of the Master Mason degree. According to Nathan Daniel Sickles, in General Ahimman Rezan, the ceremony of the third degree of Master Mason is unquestionably the most important, impressive, and instructive portion of the ritual of ancient Freemasonry. That part of the rite which is connected with the legend of the Tyrian artist Hermaphrodite is thoroughly Egyptian. Past Grand Mason Pearson is more specific in his book, Traditions of Freemasonry. He says that the legend and traditions of Hermaphrodite form the consummation of the connecting link between Freemasonry and the ancient mysteries. We readily recognize in Hermaphrodite the Osiris of the Egyptians, the Mithras of the Persians, and the Bacchus of the Greeks. There is yet another significant link between Freemasonry and the cult of homosexuality. As we know, one of Ham's sons was Mizraim, or Mizraim. I'm going to say Mizraim. Who either migrated to Egypt with his father or was born in Egypt. The name Mizraim literally means the embanker of the sea. Tradition holds that Mizraim, after containing the Nile River with dikes, built the city of Memphis. Freemasonry has commemorated the pagan family of Ham by founding Mizraim Freemasonry in France. Its counterpart in England is known as the Ancient and Primitive Rite of Memphis. Mackey's Encyclopedia of Freemasonry confirms that many of its degrees were founded upon or borrowed from the Egyptian rites, and its ritual is a very close imitation of the ancient system of initiation. So once again, let me stop here and remind you that I am reading from a book called Scarlet and the Beast, English Freemasonry, Mother of Modern Cults versus Mystery Babylon, Mother of Harlots, written by a person by the name of John Daniel, which I'm assuming is not his real name, and he is obviously some sort of fundamentalist Christian or Catholic. That is probably the reason why he's using a fake name. I want to again repeat that I don't necessarily disagree with his hate, apparently, for the mystery religion. Okay? Whether we like it or not, it doesn't matter. It existed. And part of the beef, for lack of a better word, that the mystery religion has against Christians is the fact that they believe that Christianity is a perversion of their own beliefs. Okay? So I just want to make it clear. I don't agree with the author here. I am not a fundamentalist Christian. Okay? In any form. I'm not a practicing Catholic either. Okay? So, obviously, he has his particular agenda. Even though he's stating truth, he has an agenda. And we have to keep that in mind. Are Masons homosexuals? If the ancient priesthood in mystery religions practiced homosexuality as a form of phallus worship, does the hierarchy in Freemasonry do the same? Well, I ask the same question of the modern religions, in particular the monotheistic ones. Bullough states that one of the charges made against Masons, a group which includes an order of Knights Templar and a de Molay chapter for young people, is that they are descended from a homosexual group. Nesta Webster, in Secret Societies and Subversive Movements, 1924, examined the accusations of homosexuality made against the Templars. She wrote that when the King of France, Philip the Fair, arrested many Templars on October 13th, 1307. There you go, the number 13 again. That isn't an accident or a coincidence. She wrote that when the King of France, Philip the Fair, arrested many Templars on October 13th, 1307, they all confessed to the charges brought against them, one of which was unnatural vice. These confessions, however, were made under torture, of course. 2 years later, Pope Clement V, or V, began his own investigation without the use of torture. Supposedly. I want to put... in all reality, all this... I gotta stop again. We will never know the truth. Okay? This is handed down information. Okay? So we don't know if that was the case or not. But for the sake of the point of reading this, okay, to come to an understanding, we will take it as if this is true. Okay? Let me continue. 2 years later, Pope Clement V began his own investigation without the use of torture. These same admissions were obtained in writing from the Templars. During this time, Jacques de Molay, Grand Master of the Order, along with the preceptors of the Order, was examined by 3 cardinals and 4 public notaries. They too confessed without torture to denying Christ, spitting on the cross, and to the practice of homosexuality, but they later retracted these admissions. Nonetheless, on May 12, 1310, 54 knights were burned at the stake. 4 years later, on March 14, 1314, Jacques de Molay met the same fate. Nesta Webster concluded that the Templars were bound with such terrible oath that on one hand they were threatened with the vengeance of the order if they betrayed its secrets, and on the other faced with torture if they refused to confess. Thus they found themselves between the devil and the deep sea. The truth here is difficult to determine, Webster concludes. However, that the Templars were guilty is charged. She writes, "Moreover, do the confessions of the knights appear to be the outcome of pure imagination, such as men under the influence of torture might devise? It is certainly difficult to believe that the accounts of the ceremony of initiation, given in detail by men in different countries, all closely resembling each other, yet related in different phraseology, could be pure inventions. Had the victims been driven to invent, they would surely have contradicted each other, have cried out in their agony that all kinds of wild and fantastic rites had taken place in order to satisfy the demands of their interlocutors, I guess. But no, each appears to be describing the same ceremony more or less completely, with characteristic touches that indicate the personality of the speaker, and in the main all the stories tally. In defense of Masons, stigmatizing one's enemies with charges of homosexuality is a standard practice. No doubt the ancient order of the Knights Templar practiced homosexuality. No doubt there are homosexuals in Freemasonry today, as in any institution. Oh, at least he says that. At least John Daniel admits that. He could. Is he admitting that in the institution that he's probably or was a part of? Because I'm not sure if the author is still alive or not. Apparently, he's admitting that it happens in not just Freemasonry. Oh, okay. No doubt there are homosexuals in Freemasonry today, as in any institution, and right here, he makes it clear, including the church. So, This raises the question, this is me talking again. This raises the question, the author of this book, Scarlet and the Beast, John Daniel, is he talking about the Catholic Church? And if he's saying that about the Catholic Church, then the question then is he a Protestant? Is he some offshoot that's separated from the main body of the Catholic Church? The critical question is not whether a Mason is or is not a homosexual, but rather what the attitude of the institution is toward this abominable practice. We can find the answer in the God of Freemasonry. 33rd degree Freemason and master of Masonic lore, Albert G. Mackey, in his Manual of the Lodge, describes one of the Masonic symbols of God. The phallus was an imitation of the male generative organ. It was represented usually by a column which was surrounded by a circle at its base, intended for the etus or female generative organ. This union of the phallus and the etus, which is well represented by the point within the circle, was intended by the ancients as a type of the prolific powers of nature, which they worshipped under the united form of the active or male principle and the passive or female principle. The point within a circle is an interesting and important symbol in Freemasonry, but it has been debased in the interpretation of it in the modern lectures, the sooner that interpretation is forgotten by the Masonic student, the better it will be. The better will it be. The symbol is really a beautiful but somewhat abstruse allusion to the old sun worship and introduces us for the first time to that modification of it known among the ancients as the worship of the phallus. As stated earlier, Webster defines phallus as a symbol or representation of the penis. Phallicism is defined as the worship of the generative principle as symbolized by the phallus, or worship of the penis. Now, I'm looking at a picture in the book of this point within the circle, and it's interesting to note that this is the same symbol that the character or superhero Dr. Manhattan puts on his forehead in the comic book and movie known as Watchmen. So I think in the movie or the book they tried to explain it away as some scientific symbol, but here plainly the author of this book is saying that it's another symbol for the sun, another symbol for the penis. Is American Freemasonry, sorry, my mouth is dry. Is American Freemasonry behind the homosexual lobby? Despite the threat of AIDS, homosexuals today constitute a powerful cultural and political lobby. The homosexual agenda is publicized and promoted by the media and entertainment elites in the United States. Like the Masonic-controlled earnings of the early 20th century, the extent and influence of the homosexual lobby and the actions radical homosexuals threaten against society at large would surprise and shock many people who are unaware of their truly revolutionary and destructive agenda. For instance, homosexuals have defiantly threatened to spread their cursed disease among the whole population. Again, I must stop and remind listeners that I am reading from a book. The author of this book a person by the name of John Daniel, he is writing this. I'm just repeating what he's saying. I don't necessarily agree. I will continue. For instance, homosexuals have defiantly threatened to spread their cursed disease among the whole population. The militant Dallas Gay News, May 20th, 1983, tried to intimidate our government with these menacing words, and I quote, "There has come the idea that if research money for AIDS is not forthcoming at a certain level by a certain date, that all gay males should give blood. Whatever action is required to get national attention is valid. If that includes blood terrorism, so be it." Homosexuals not only threaten to spread their disease, they boldly and angrily flaunt their deadly sin as a normal lifestyle. For example, every June during Gay/Lesbian Liberation Week, our nation's gay community defiantly marches by the tens of thousands in major cities throughout the country. A militant homosexual was quoted in the New York Times as saying, "We aren't oriented toward acceptance, but toward changing every institution in this country." Let me repeat that again. And this is supposedly a quote from someone, and it was printed in the New York Times. So take it as you wish. We know that, that newspaper, amongst many others, make up news. So a militant homosexual was quoted in the New York Times as saying, we aren't oriented toward acceptance, but toward changing every institution in this country," meaning the US. What are the institutional changes advocated by the homosexual movement? To answer that question, we need only examine the Gay Bill of Rights, introduced on January 3rd, 1985, in the House of Representatives by Congressman Ted Weiss, a liberal Democrat, and 45 co-sponsors, including representatives from the most ultra-liberal homosexual centers in the nation, New York and California. The bill was referred jointly to the Committees on Education and Labor and the Judiciary. The bill intends to 1. Legalize homosexuality and lesbianism. 2. Criminally prosecute all churches, schools, and businesses for refusing to hire homosexuals. Let me repeat that one, because that's what's going on right now. Criminally prosecute all churches, schools, and businesses for refusing to hire homosexuals. 3. Criminally prosecute any individual who refuses housing accommodations to homosexuals/lesbian couples. 4. Allow the legal marriage of homosexual/lesbian couples and their adoption of children. And 5. Require all public schools to create sex education courses taught by homosexuals to show their lifestyle as a moral, healthy, and normal alternative to heterosexuality. This bill is still before Congress, although some states such as Hawaii and New Jersey have passed some versions of it. How interesting. Female homosexuals, who until recently have received less attention, have been active for many years in progressive social movements. For instance, the Christian Inquirer, a monthly newspaper that gives Christians a national voice for family freedom and our Christian heritage, reported in February 1985 that the feminist peace movement of the early 1980s was made exclusively of lesbians who dabbled in the black arts of witchcraft. A coven of 600 of these women marched on the Seneca Army Depot near Romulus, New York, on July 4, 1983. At that time, They were protesting the planned deployment of cruise and Pershing II missiles in the NATO countries of Western Europe. The women, who called themselves the Women's Encampment for a Future of Peace, occupied a 53-acre farm with a dilapidated house and barn. Eagle Forum, headed by Phyllis Schlafly, I'm going to say the name again, and those of you who are getting what I'm coming at, okay, there's a very, along with people being liberal Democrat, I think there's a much more important connection. So I'm going to say the name again. Phyllis Schlafly, or Schlafly. Interesting name, Schlafly. Doesn't sound, sounds kind of, well, you figure it out. I'm not going to say it, because it might get me booted off or terminated off of YouTube. So, you figure it out, the name. Informs us that the National Organization for Women, NOW, is full of lesbians. Schlafly warns women of the dangers of NOW. Ever since the mid-1970s, lesbian and gay political pressures on our elected officials have been increasing. The lesbians and homosexuals have won victory after victory over you and your family. Now wants custody rights, adoption rights, and housing rights for lesbians. They want to repeal all sodomy laws and thereby make sodomy legal. In fact, the current head of NOW, Patricia Ireland, is a self-proclaimed lesbian. Martha Shelley, who wrote Lesbianism and the Women's Movement for Women's Liberation, Blueprint for the Future, said, "To me, lesbianism is not an oddity of a few women to be hidden in the background of the movement. In a way, it is the heart of the women's liberation movement." Likewise, M. Zach and P. Moots, editors of Women and the Politics of Culture, Studies in the Sexual Economy, endorse lesbianism. No females will ever be free to choose to be anything until they are also free to choose to be lesbians. I apologize for my voice. I'm becoming a little it's getting a little stuffy. I hope I'm not coming down with a cold. What influence has the homosexual lobby extended over American politics and society? The following chronology indicates its influence over and among organizations, legislators, and prominent people who have promoted homosexuality from 1991 through 1993. And the reason why it's limited to that time frame is because this book came around that time. Sometime in the 90s it came out. December 1991. Gay rights bill approved by the state of Hawaii legislature and signed into law. Senate Bill 1811, an amendment to the Employment Practices Act, authorizes Hawaii Civil Rights Commission to protect homosexuals and bisexuals as special classes of workers. January 1992, New Jersey Governor James Florio signed into law a statute prohibiting churches from discriminating in the hiring and firing of homosexuals. The law also forces churches to accommodate homosexuals in its marriage and sacrament services. April 1992. A homosexual group, ACT UP, pushes sex kits on kids. Homosexuals also protest dial-a-porn restrictions. May 1992. Head of the Democratic Party said his party is for homosexuals. July 1992. Homosexuals challenge the Boy Scouts ban on homosexuals. September 1992. The Masonic-founded and controlled National Education Association, NEA, rewards founder of Project 10, Gay Counseling Program, Also, children's book Daddy's Roommate released. Large colorful format with one line of text on each page is readable by most first graders. On one page is written, "Being gay is just one more kind of love," says the son, who notices that his dad and male roommate sleep together. December 1992. The San Francisco Examiner claimed that openly gay people are filling an unprecedented 13 spots on the Clinton transition team. January 1993. President Bill Clinton attempts to lift the ban on homosexuals in the military. And we all know what happened, as far as that's concerned. Furthermore, President Clinton, who was schooled at Oxford by English Masonic professors who are instructed to teach Rhodes Scholars how to destroy Christianity in their respective nations, has staffed his administration with lesbians and Christian haters, some of whom are members of the two British Masonic front organizations, the Council of Foreign Relations, CFR, and the Trilateral Commission, TC. Following is a list of these radical women. And for the sake of time, I'm going to skip. Well, maybe it is. I'm going to skip the names because, again, this is all hearsay. This is a list by the author, and I'm not trying to get in any trouble, so I'm going to skip the names. Some of them are some of them are known people. So I'm just going to skip that. The homosexual society in America has gone the way of Ham, who announced boldly to his brothers that he sodomized their father, the prophet Isaiah, when writing on the subject of homosexuality in Isaiah 3:9, gives this divine warning. The look on their faces testifies against them. They parade their sin like Sodom. They do not hide it. Woe to them! They have brought disaster upon themselves. Likewise, the Apostle Paul writes in Romans 1:27b, men committed indecent acts with other men and received in themselves the due penalty for their perversion. Many Christians wonder if the two phrases, they have brought disaster upon themselves and they have received in themselves the penalty for their perversion, have not been fulfilled in the disaster and penalty of the AIDS virus. All right, let me see. Ooh, there's a lot of this. Let me see. There's a lot of this. I'll take this break right here to once again repeat that I am reading from a book called Scarlet and the Beast. English Freemasonry, Mother of Modern Cults, versus Babylon, Mother of Harlots. Written by a person by the name of John Daniel, which sounds like a fake name, as far as I'm concerned. It could be real, who knows. And I want to repeat again that I don't necessarily agree with some of his views, because if you follow blindly what he apparently believes, then you could also be being set up for your own demise. I have no doubt that part of the agenda is the elimination of Judeo-Christianity. I have no doubt about it whatsoever. But this sort of rhetoric, where he says about homosexuals and lesbians, could be used against Christians and Jews. You see, you have to be very careful. because it's this sort of thing that their enemies are going to use to come after them. So whenever you're reading something, I don't care if you get the information from the internet, be very careful. There's just as many lies on the internet than anywhere else. Books, TV, internet. There are lies everywhere. So I just wanted to repeat that fact. Freemasonry defends the right to practice homosexuality. How are individuals within Masonry brought not only to tolerate homosexuality, but to defend it as an acceptable lifestyle? It begins with the initiate into Masonry, who first accepts the point within the circle as a symbol of divine power. But as he passes through the chairs in each degree, he eventually discovers that his acceptance of this power signifies his approval of all forms of sex. Deviate or otherwise. Therefore, he must defend an individual's right in a free society to practice homosexuality, even if it means passing laws to do so. I'm going to stop here one more time, and please bear with me. This is something I've always thought about, and I think it's important here. There's this belief amongst the Judeo-Christians of this society here in the United States that the that the founding fathers were Christians. Therefore, they were against homosexuality. Well, the so-called founding fathers, I call them something different. I call them the founding Freemasons. Okay? And they were initiates of the mystery school. They even called this, what they created here in the United States, they called it a experiment. The Great Experiment. So I must again remind people, okay, that if we're going to be truthful about tolerating people, okay, because otherwise, if we don't tolerate people with particular lifestyles, then we are going to come to a point where we're going to have to change the so-called Constitution, because we are no longer then practicing. Now, I know there's a segment of the people saying, well, wait a minute. It's one thing for the Constitution to give us the freedoms to believe in this or that. It doesn't necessarily mean sexual preferences. But you have to understand that because it doesn't clarify that, it can be used, you see, to mean that it also means that. I don't know if I'm making any sense. You see, if we have a so-called free society, all right, we have to tolerate lifestyles that maybe personally we don't believe in. But to believe the lie that the founding Freemasons, so-called founding fathers, were Christians. I mean, there are reports that Thomas Jefferson used to rip out pages in the Bible that he didn't like. The founding fathers, the founding Freemasons, were not fans of Christianity. That's one of the reasons why they made this society, or they founded this so-called constitutional republic. That's what it's called in the Constitution. To test us It's a test to see if we really would be able to tolerate different peoples and lifestyles. What I see that's going to happen is, actually, it's not even what's going to happen, it's already happened. The experiment has failed. We are going to be in some way or another, okay, whether it's pro or against, we're going to somehow be enslaved again. It's all working back for us to be slaves again. And I think what's going on, this clash of cultures and ideas and lifestyles that's going on now, is all done on purpose. I don't believe it's going to be one or the other. It's going to be the result of this clash is going to be the new world order. It's not going to be the left. It's not going to be the right. Whatever comes about from this clash has to happen. The only way to avoid it's unavoidable, because even if you say, I'm not going to choose this side, I'm not going to choose that side, you're going to have to choose a side eventually. You're going to have to choose the worst, the lesser rather, of the evils. Because as far as I'm concerned, they're both equally evil. Okay? You're going to have to choose the one that's going to work for you. That's going to help you survive the coming apocalypse, for lack of a better word. I don't want to get, I mean that as, like just a term. Meaning, the changes that are happening. There's not going to be a change of the world. There's not going to be an end of the world. It's going to be a change of the type of world that we live in. It's going to be way different than what it is now. And unfortunately, for there to be a change, the old has to be eliminated. Now, I don't want to sound cryptic, even though that does sound cryptic. A lot of us are going to be destroyed. I have my own theories on how this is going to happen. There are various different scenarios. I think it's going to be a little bit of that scenario, a little bit of this scenario. But unfortunately, I see a large percentage of the population in the United States and even in Europe being wiped out. Because you have to create, you have to destroy whatever's there already. So that's my own personal opinion. I'll continue for a little bit more. I'm okay. I'm gonna read again. Once again, I'm reading from Scarlet and the Beast, Volume 2. Does this mean Masons are homosexual? Of course not. But if the Masonic opinion is the same as Plato's, which it is, then homosexuality is not sin, but just another lifestyle. Freemasonry, as an institution, must therefore permit and defend the practice of homosexuality. The question is, how will a Mason, who is a legislator or judge, rule regarding this vile practice? This is the words of the author. If it has been suggested in Masonry that he permit it. We can find the answer in history in the legislation which followed the Masonic French Revolution of 1789. First, the death penalty was removed for all sex crimes. 21 years later, Freemason Napoleon Bonaparte drafted the Napoleonic Code, the most innovative item of which was to leave unpunished any sexual activity in private between consenting adult parties, whether this took place between women, men, or men and women. Did the Napoleonic Code reflect the desires of the Masonic Lodge as a whole? Or was it the creation of one man who just happened to be a Mason? 33rd degree Mason Oswald Worth answers in El Edil Initiatique by describing the weight and influence of the Masonic tradition upon individual Masons. Now, the strength of Freemasonry lies in the collective will of its members. When they meet, it is only to work, and since no energy is wasted, every lodge is a seed bed of moral and social change. But do not ask the vast majority of Freemasons to give reasons for what they do. They act by instinct, following shadowy traditions which for centuries have exercised their suggestive influence. A force superior to themselves impels Masons and coordinates their efforts with an intelligence far exceeding that possessed by any one individual among them. A Mason by the name of Regis made clear at the Grand Orient Convention at Paris, France, in 1928, that it is specifically the politicians that Freemasonry desires to control with the Masonic spirit. I am perfectly well aware that we do, discreetly, form the elite in all the big social and political parties, and that thus we are sure of being able to control their policy. It is our duty, I repeat, our duty, to make sure that we control the politicians who are elected, that we right their wrongs and show them their mistakes, and reproach them for what they have failed to do. In a word, Freemasonry should be the politician's conscience. In Freemasonry is the politician's conscience, and if Freemasonry as an institution condones all forms of sex as natural and acceptable, we have a moral problem should Masons be a dominant force in our executive, legislative, and judiciary bodies at both the state and federal levels of government. State and federal politicians, are they Masons? And let me see how much we have left. Wow, there's quite a bit left here. I want to finish it so that I can start something new on the next show and not have to worry about catching up. Okay. State and federal politicians, are they Masons? During World War II, Mrs. Lyral Clark Van Heining, editor of Women's Voice magazine, during the 1940s and 50s, published 35 articles on the truth of Freemasonry. Her father-in-law and husband were both good men and Masons, and she a member of the Eastern Star. Mrs. Van Heining was rebuked by a Mason who told her, "Masonry does not go into politics." Her answer to him was, "I too made that empty boast." Until I found out that 85% of all office holders, state and federal, in our country are Masons. Mrs. Van Heining's claim was backed by U.S. Ambassador William Edward Dunn, who stated in 1953 that United States Masons were well-placed and politically influential. For example, in 1923, 69% of congressmen and 63% of senators were Masons. By 1948, that percentage decreased to 54 and 53 respectively, yet still a majority. In 1959, 6 of the 11 cabinet members were Masons, as were 5 of the 9 Supreme Court justices. 54 of 96 U.S. senators, 189 of 430 U.S. representatives, and 29 of 49 state governors. Although the number of Masons in government appears to be decreasing with each survey, by 1964, Masons were still dominant in politics. The majority of state governors and members of the Senate and the Supreme Court were Freemasons, and according to a June 1981 circular published by the Masonic Service Association entitled Master Masons, who are members of the Supreme Court and senators and representatives of the 97th Congress, there were 28 U.S. senators, 80 U.S. representatives, and 11 state governors who were Master Masons, third degree. From this last statistic, it may appear that the number of Masons in public life has dramatically decreased in recent years. This statistic is misleading, however, for the count represents Master Masons, third degree only. There are many higher degree Masons holding political office. For example, the Congressional Record Senate, September 9, 1987, lists 18 senators and 58 congressmen as 33rd degree Masons. These are in most influential positions. There are many more 4th to 32nd degree Masons not reported in these surveys. It also appears that African Americans must be Masons if they intend to enter politics. This fact is confirmed by Black Muslim Mustafa El-Amin, who authored Freemasonry, Ancient Egypt, and the Islamic Destiny, 1988. The foreword to his book was written by Black Muslim Ansari Nadir, who begins with a question. What is it about Freemasonry that most of the early founding fathers of America felt they need to embrace it? Why is it that many members of the Congress, the Supreme Court, judges, politicians, etc., have joined and studied the teachings of Freemasonry? Many African American leaders have also locked arms with Freemasonry. Reverend Jesse Jackson, Mayor Andrew Young, Atlanta, former Mayor Harold Washington, Chicago, NAACP Executive Director Benjamin Hooks, Mayor Thomas Bradley, Los Angeles, Congressman Louis Stokes, the late Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall, Mayor Marion Barry, District of Columbia, and stop right there. You all know what happened to him. State Senator Julian Bond, Mayor Coleman Young, Detroit, John A. Johnson, publisher of Ebony and Jet magazines, former Mayor Kenneth Gibson, Newark, and many, many more are Masons. And that's not coming from me. I'm reading what the author says came from a different book. Former 33rd degree Mason Jim Shaw informs us that since World War I, most of our presidents have been Masons, and that any who were not were controlled by a 33rd degree Masonic dominated cabinet. Among these were, and I'm not surprised, John F. Kennedy's cabinet, which he proposed to replace with a non-Masonic cabinet following his next election, but he never lived to accomplish his goal. So, for those of you thinking that it was about the money, that Kennedy was going to change the money, take us out of the Federal Reserve, that's bullshit. Kennedy was killed by his own masters, okay? Master puts you in power, Master takes you out if you don't go along with Master. That's how it works, people. And it doesn't matter if you're a president. It doesn't matter if you're an entertainer. Master rules. And sometimes he has to make an example of an individual, whether famous or not, to remind the rest of you to do as he tells you. I'm telling you what Master thinks. So take this, take it, how you will. I'm being honest. You see what I'm saying? I don't care. I don't care what groups that you join. I'm about getting to the root of it, the truth. And if you agree, hey, I believe you should be a man of your word. If you sign a contract, I don't care about what, you have to complete the contract. You know? So, let us continue. Following is a list of Masonic presidents with their degree. Since World War I, Warren G. Harding, 32nd, Franklin D. Roosevelt, 32nd, Harry S. Truman, 33rd, Lyndon B. Johnson, 1st, Gerald R. Ford, 33rd, and Ronald Reagan. Let me repeat that one. Ronald Reagan, 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 Ronald Reagan. For those of you who believe that Ronald Reagan was one of you, and that he supported the Republican cause and conservatives, okay, who progressed, this is Ronald Reagan, who progressed from the 32nd to the 33rd degree during his presidency. Oh, when will you learn? When will you learn? John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon were both members of English Freemasonry's front organization, the Council on Foreign Relations, CFR. When Nixon was exposed as a member of the CFR, he resigned from that body. Jimmy Carter and George Bush are both, and I'm talking about the late George Bush, are both members of the CFR's offspring, the Trilateral Commission, TC. George Bush is also a member of the Knights Templar Skull and Bones Society at Yale University. Bill Clinton is an active member of English Freemasonry's three fronts: the Round Table, Bilderbergers, the Council on Foreign Relations, and the Trilateral Commission. So apparently Clinton was a good kiss ass. He couldn't just be part of one, he was part of all of them. Not only were most of our recent presidents Masons, but our Supreme Court has been stacked with Masons since the Great Depression. Paul Fisher, in Behind the Lodge Door, 1988, documents that beginning with appointments to the court by President Franklin D. Roosevelt and continuing through the first 3 years of President Richard M. Nixon's first term, members of the International Secret Society dominated the high bench on ratios ranging from 5 to 4, beginning in 1941, to 7 to 2, beginning in 1946. During the tenure of these justices, Bible reading and prayer were outlawed in our public schools, and pornography and abortion were legalized. We are told, however, that Freemasonry never gets involved in politics. Maybe the Lodge does not, but Masons certainly do. And if Freemasonry is the politician's conscience, what's the difference? What is wrong with a Mason in public life? The answer is his vote. The same vote that is feared by Masons when a follower of Jesus Christ gets involved in politics. A Mason will vote his convictions. What then, we must ask, are the Mason's convictions? Not so long ago, 33rd degree Mason Albert Pike, all roads always lead to Albert Pike, that's me saying this, outlined the agenda of the committed Mason. Speaking to the 33rd degree Supreme Council Convention in Paris, France, in October 1885, Pike said that supernaturalism, authority, and anti-Masonic activity must be destroyed. Let me repeat that again. Pike said that supernaturalism, authority, and anti-Masonic activity must be destroyed. Those of you in Christ, this is me speaking now. I stopped. I must reiterate what I said before. Those of you in the Christian religion, okay, who are falling for the propaganda, you are putting yourself in danger. You are in serious danger. They want you to be radical. They want you to say and do things that put you in a bad light. They're coming for you. And you Jews and Muslims, you're also they have their sights on you too. See, I can't blame them. If you fall victim to the propaganda that's going to be used against you, I cannot blame them. You have to be smart enough to prepare yourself. If you're not, you're going to be exactly what they call you. Prey. Cattle. Goyim. I will continue now. There must be materialism of conscience, of education, and the state. This must be imposed upon the family, the nation, and on humanity. By every means, whatever they may be, said Pike. One must impose first on the family and then on the nation in order to achieve the aim of imposing on humanity. The allegiance of a Mason is likewise to the triumph of progress and of universal unity, not to a region, a people, a church, or a nation. For example, the oath taken over 100 years ago by Italian General Garibaldi for reception of the 33rd degree is a vow to oppose all that is truly humane, Christian, and godly. And I quote, I swear to have no other country but the country universal. I swear to oppose utterly always and everywhere the boundaries of nations and boundaries of fields, of houses, and of workshops, and the bonds of family. I swear to overthrow at the sacrifice of my life the boundaries which the humanicide Christians have traced with blood and mud in the name of God. I swear to devote my entire existence to the endless triumph of progress and of universal unity, and I declare my adherence to the denial of God and of the soul. Clearly, a Mason in politics, especially a high Mason, is anti-Christian, anti-Christ, anti-church, anti-family, anti-nation, and pro-one world government. These are the convictions for which he will vote. In short, with every vote, the Mason is a subversive, undermining our Christian nation. Is it any mystery why Christianity is under increasing attack in America today, and why homosexuals are making such rapid advancement in their quest for gay rights? How about conservative Masons? Even if a Mason believes himself to be a political or social conservative, and is even known as such publicly, sooner or later he will feel the weight of his Masonic brethren on issues related to the Masonic agenda. A case in point is the story of Senator Lister Hill of Alabama, a conservative Mason. In 1945, Hill was backing the federal aid to education bill, known as the Meade-Aiken Bill, S717, or S717, which would have funded Christian schools as well as public schools. Supreme Court Justice Hugo Black from Alabama, a 33rd degree Mason and member of the KKK, was against the bill. He thus wrote Senator Hill a letter which contained an implied threat that Masons would not re-elect the senator if he did not challenge this activity. Meaning, of course, the provision in the bill to fund Christian schools. A portion of Justice Black's letter is quoted by Paul Fisher in Behind the Lodge Door. And I want you to take this quote from that book, Behind the Lodge Door. I want you to take it with a grain of salt, because the name of the author of that book is Paul Fisher. Once again, look at the name. Look at the name. You will doubtless be interested in this document, Scottish Rite News Bulletin, dated April 5th, 1945, insofar as it may affect you personally, and because it may also affect the fate of your federal aid to education bill. You know the influence of the Scottish Rite Masons in Alabama and elsewhere. If you and others do not challenge this activity, you will hear from it later in connection with the passage of your bill and future elections. Paul Fisher lends 2 whole chapters to Freemasonry's war against the Meade-Aiken Bill. Most of the battle was fought through Masonic publications, pointedly directed to all Masons on Capitol Hill. Remember the statement of the French Freemason? It is our duty, I repeat, our duty, to make sure that we control the politicians who are elected, that we right their wrongs and show them their mistakes and reapproach them for what they have failed to do. In a word, Freemasonry should be the politician's conscience. How does Freemasonry control the politician's conscience? By veiled threats of controlling the votes at the polls. There is no record that Senator Hill replied to Justice Black's letter. Obviously, Senator Hill, as well as all Masons on Capitol Hill, got the message. After 3 years of debate on the Senate floor and intense lobbying against the bill by the Masonic Scottish Rite magazine, the Meade-Aiken Bill died. Not until 1965 was the issue addressed again, when the Elementary and Secondary Act was approved. This act denied funds to parochial schools. Has Freemasonry changed over the years? Not at all. The liberal laws passed in Congress and the Senate confirm that Masonic thought still dominates our national life and policy. The corruption of our national morals over the last 50 years confirms the same. For example, in 1957, when 7 Masons were on the Supreme Court, pornography was legalized under the rubric of freedom of speech. In 1962 and 1963, when 6 Masonic justices sat on the bench, Bible reading and school prayers were outlawed. In 1966, the Supreme Court ruled against the firing of those members of the Communist Party who had infiltrated our government. 6 Masonic justices were on the bench. The anti-American Masonic oath. Can a Mason in public office vote against the Masonic agenda and remain a Mason? The answer is revealed in the Masonic oath, beginning with his first initiation. The novice is compelled never to question, always to obey blindly his unseen superiors. Past Grand Master Robert Morris confirms in Webb's Monitor that, right or wrong, the initiate's very existence as a Mason hangs upon his obedience to the powers immediately set above him. Is the Masonic obligation more binding than the oath of public office? According to Webb's Monitor, the answer is positive. The covenant is irrevocable. The Mason cannot cast off or nullify his Masonic covenant. No law of the land can affect it. If a Mason, therefore, is elected to any political office, he cannot keep the Masonic oath if it is in conflict with his oath of office. If he disobeys the dictates of his Masonic superiors, he will not, as we have seen, remain in office. We must conclude, therefore, that those Masons who hold political office, election after election, are voting to further the Masonic agenda. such as a politician, no matter what his rhetoric while campaigning, cannot be trusted to uphold the freedoms guaranteed Christians by the Constitution, nor to uphold standards of morality for this country. Albert Pike's imposition in action. Masonic legislators defy all logic when they pass laws which are permissive and protective of homosexuals. Although homosexuals are the primary carrier of the deadly disease AIDS, such legislative action appears to be a continuation of Albert Pike's Masonic imposition on our families, our nation, and humanity as a whole. The arrogance and terrible consequences of such an imposition was outlined by economist Thomas Sowell in his syndicated column for the New York Times on August 31st, 1992. The self-anointed believe that their views on homosexuals and on AIDS are not just one view among others. Theirs are the preemptive views to be imposed on others. The anointed have decided how much risk you or your children should be exposed to, and have made it impossible for you to find out which of your associates or your children's classmates carry this deadly infection. For other infectious diseases such as syphilis, the law requires a physician to report who has the infection so that it can be traced and contained. With AIDS, it is just the opposite. The doctor is forbidden to report the disease, even if he knows that his patient is going around spreading the fatal virus to others. As we have seen, the defiant spirit of Ham flourishes in our Masonic legislators who cover up the threat AIDS imposes on our society. And let me stop right here and re-emphasize a point the author made earlier in this chapter. I'll go back to it. And again, I'm reading what he wrote. Ham's progeny are the black races. Let me repeat. Ham's progeny are the black races. Let me repeat. Ham's progeny are the black races. Let me go back to what he just said. As we have seen, the defiant spirit of Ham, the black races, flourishes in our Masonic legislators who cover up the threat AIDS imposes on our society. According to Jean Antonio and Tom Puckett in the AIDS cover-up, although 93% of all AIDS victims are homosexuals or drug addicts, the cover-up is to hide the truth that this dreaded disease is a judgment from God. Be careful who you listen to. Be careful who you follow. This author of this book is not the only one. Okay? Evil loves to dress up holy. Okay? Take that to the bank. Make it out of it what you will. Masonic judges protect sex deviates. Former 33rd degree Mason Reverend Jim Shaw tells us that the Mason, when taking the oath for the Royal Ark degree, swears to vote for a companion Royal Ark Mason, should he run for any political office. Shaw further states that any Mason aspiring to get involved in politics is encouraged to take the Royal Ark degree. The September 1987 congressional record cited earlier reports that 41 federal judges are Masons, and one half of the Judiciary Committee who appoint them are their fraternity brothers. According to the Handbook of Freemasonry, Masons on this committee are bound by Masonic oath to do all within their power to place Masons on the bench. Moreover, the handbook records the Master Mason's oath which oath demands that both Masonic judges and jurors protect Masons who come before them. And then you wonder why certain people, when they go to court for crimes, are found not guilty. It's a gang. It's a clique. If I'm part of a gang and I see my boy on the street and someone's coming after him, it is my duty. I took an oath to protect my brother. They do the same. And here I'm quoting the handbook. Whenever you see any of our signs made by a brother Mason, and especially the grand hailing sign of distress, you must always be sure to obey them, even at the risk of your life. If you're on a jury, and the defendant is a Mason, and makes the grand hailing sign, you must obey it. You must disagree with your brother's jurors if necessary, but you must be sure not to bring the Mason guilty, for that would bring disgrace upon our order. It may be perjury, to be sure, to do this, but then you're fulfilling your obligation, and you know if you live up to your obligation, you'll be free from sin. The perversion of justice by Masonic judges can be illustrated by two examples from sex crime trials. The first example is drawn from a case in London, England, where a jealous father had broken up the marriage of his daughter. The husband was suing for custody of their child. Both the judge and the father were Masons. The story is told by Stephen Knight, a British investigative journalist who died mysteriously at the age of 33, 18 months following the publication of this story in his book, The Brotherhood, 1984. The courtroom scene opens with the father on the witness stand. Counsel for Hammond, the husband, was getting close to showing that the father-daughter relationship was at least mentally incestuous and was going on to find out the likelihood of there having been actual incest in the past. This barrister, lawyer for the husband, either did not see or thought nothing of a movement made by Denby, the father, at what was for him the most perilous moment of his cross-examination. He, the father, suddenly placed his left arm stiff at his side, his fingertips pointing to the floor, and at the same time craned his head round over his right shoulder, his right hand above his eyes as if shading them. It was as if, said Hammond later, he was watching an aeroplane in the back corner of the court. At the time it happened, Hammond thought nothing of it other than its evidence of an old man's strangeness. Only later, thinking back over the judge's inexplicable behavior immediately afterwards, did he recall Denby's action. Asked by a friend to describe the action, Hammond imitated it and was astonished to be told that it was a Freemasonic signal. As soon as the judge saw the signal, he jumped forward in his seat and ordered counsel to cease his questioning of Denby, utterly mystifying Hammond. From that moment, Hammond's case was doomed. Counsel was blocked at every step in his questioning, and as stated, was refused permission to call necessary witnesses. The second example was taken from a case that occurred in Albany, New York. The story is told in the January 1988 newsletter, Intercessors for America. 6 de Molay Masons accused of sexually abusing a member of their own youth organization in 1985 were acquitted by the Albany County District Attorney and a judge. Both Masons. Masons are bound by blood oath to protect and extricate fellow Masons. Conflict of interest charges continue to mount because of such practices. Understand that the sexual abuse noted in the Albany case is against another male. Since only sons of Masons can join the de Molays, it was Jacques de Molay, Grand Master of the Knights Templar, as well as his followers, who were accused of acts of sodomy. 400 years later, the Knights Templars founded Scottish Rite Freemasonry, the largest Masonic body in the world, which today still protects and defends the deviant behavior of its members, both adult and juvenile. Summary: homosexuality originated with Ham, son of Noah. Ham, the first post-Diluvian homosexual. Okay, I'm going back again. I want you to see the deceptiveness of the person who wrote this. They're not a good guy. They're a person who has a beef with another gang. Okay? He's exposing some things. Some of it might be true, some of it might be false. But his purpose in writing this book, okay, is not good. And it's certainly not good for Christians. I repeat what he said earlier. Ham's progeny are the black races. And in the summary he says, homosexuality originated with Ham. What does that mean? Ham's progeny are the black races. Then he says homosexuality originated with Ham, son of Noah. Ham, the first post-Diluvian homosexual, is the father of today's gay community. What did he say before? Ham's progeny are the black races. To legitimate his deviate lifestyle, the descendants of Ham, and who are the descendants of Ham? The black races. The descendants of Ham, the black races, made homosexuality a religious rite in all Babylonian mystery religions. As we have seen, Freemasonry claims to be an extension of that religion. Thus, through strategically placed Masonic legislators and judges, Freemasonry continues to protect the rights of this cult of deviate sex. And that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Wow, 2 hours. And I can't promise that the next show is going to be anytime soon because this sort of research takes me a little bit of time. Again, the purpose of this show is I'm exposing everybody. I don't have an agenda. I don't choose this side, I don't choose that side. Okay? What I want people to understand is that your best bet is just to be on your own side. Because if you fall into the traps of these groups, and again, I must repeat, I don't necessarily disagree with their beliefs. What I disagree with is the lying, the hypocrisy, the secrecy. That's what I disagree with. Everybody should know and make up their own mind on whether they're going to follow whatever it is. Till next time, this is Illuminati, and this is your host, Peace.